Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show that's glad to find you safe and sound. I'm Christy Powell. My co-host this week has over 7 trillion nerve endings and a seemingly supernatural self-defense mechanism. Vila Bianca.
Hello, everybody.
And our guest tonight is the host of Stuck Not Broken and Polyvagal podcaster, Justin Sunseri.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited. Can I say hi with my dogs here real quick?
Yeah, bring them in. Let's do it.
I was told
Start with the important stuff.
There you go. Yeah, this is Daisy.
Oh my goodness.
She is a yapper, very annoying, but she's cute. And then Ginger, come here. A little bit bigger, but not much. This is Ginger. Super sweet. She just like melts into you. She's a extremely affectionate dog. We love them both, but Ginger's extremely, just insanely affectionate.
I want everybody to picture your cute dogs when they start to hear dogs barking in the background, because that's definitely not my poorly behaved mongrels. That's Justin's adorable pets that you just met.
Ginger and Daisy. There you go. But thank you for having me on. In my time with the tech crew before this, I got the impression that your audience is extremely important to you, to both of you. And so to be trusted enough to come on here and share what I think I know, it's an honor. So thank you, seriously.
We really appreciate you being here. Thanks so much.
And if you guys would like to talk to us tonight or talk to Justin, I know we're getting into some neuroception tonight. So we're talking on some of the same things we discussed with Annette James and hopefully bringing that into a larger perspective for y'all. If that's interesting to you, if you're listening and you've got a question or maybe something that we say resonates with you and you want to talk about it, give us a call at 512-991-9242. Or if you're not by a phone or are overseas and that would be very expensive for you, you can always get in touch via your computer using the link tiny.cc/callsex. So no excuses. We want to hear from you.
Yeah, well, we did speak to Annette James recently about the polyvagal ladder and got kind of just a broad overview on polyvagal theory. You definitely don't need to be understanding what any of those words mean. If you missed that episode and are watching now, we're definitely going to walk you through this as gently as we can. But yeah, we're getting into a little bit of neuroscience. So Justin, I'd love it if you could give us just a broad overview for folks who missed it on kind of the discovery of these ideas and how polyvagal theory, I guess, came to your attention.
It came to my attention. So I'm a therapist. I work primarily in a public school district here in California. I have some after hours private pay clients, but I work mostly with high schoolers in the school district here. And there was one client in particular, or one student in particular I was working with that I wasn't happy with the way things were going as far as myself as a therapist and seeing change, because we were very, very stuck. And so there was a heavy history of trauma with this particular student. And that summer, so during the summers, we can meet with students, but usually they want nothing to do with us. So they want their summer breaks with no staff, no school whatsoever, right? So it's a really good opportunity to develop new curriculum or do some professional development, stuff like that. And I told myself, all right, this is obviously, there's a lot of trauma here. I hear a lot about how trauma lives in the body and stuff like that. But I was like, I don't know what that means. I have no idea what this means. And I'm going to start from scratch. I'm going to assume that I know nothing about trauma. And I went to where any good academic would go, which is YouTube. And I looked up trauma. And I found something called somatic experiencing from Dr. Peter Levine. Mm-hmm. And it's a modality that focuses on the body, on how trauma lives in the body. And so I started learning more about that. And he was doing what looked like, I don't want to use the word miracles. I don't feel like it's the great word for this platform, but it's like, my first impression was like, no, this is nonsense. And like, that's not how this works. But I kept learning because, again, I assumed I know nothing, and I was just open to new ideas. And that led me to some lectures by Dr. Stephen Porges. And he's the person who created the polyvagal theory. And his lectures kind of outlined or explained how the autonomic nervous system in particular is involved in trauma, and how we react when we feel more or less safe due to cues from the environment or even internal cues as well. And that's how I got into polyvagal theory. And when I first heard about it, it's tough academic stuff, but I was able to decipher enough of it to be like, okay, I get what he's saying. I can translate this to my clients. I can put the pieces together. And I just became, I don't think obsessed is an understatement. Like I just was consumed by inhaling as much of this information as I possibly could for quite a while. And then I developed it into the podcast and presentations for the staff at my school and all that kind of stuff. But that's how I came across polyvagal theory. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of an addicting idea. I was mentioning before the show that I, spent a lot of time this summer going through your podcast and just kind of exploring these ideas, because in therapy, you so rarely get to attach what you see as like sort of the theory of mind to the body and the way that it's operating, and to come at it in this more direct scientific neurological approach.
Yeah, but and so the trick is like, how do you take that and decipher it in a way that anybody can understand? And that
Mhm.
really is that's the feedback I get a lot from the podcast, is like now it makes sense finally, and it's in words that I can understand. And my goal was, I have to be able to translate this for my teenage clients that I work with, students, but also for teachers, also for, we have our own police district for our police, our school district. Sorry. So like, how can I take this information and be able to translate it for anybody that comes across it? And
Mhm.
that's still my goal, is like, how can I make this easily digestible, but also non-threatening? And we talk about trauma, because it has a lot to do with trauma. It's like, how can I present this in a way that people can take in without being overtly triggered, and that the risk is still there, but I feel like I've found ways to minimize that and actually make it pretty fun to listen to and understand. And then people do apply it to themselves. And but yeah, that's the trick, is like, this information is great, but how do we use this day to day? How do we understand this in a way that's anybody can understand?
Yeah, well, I mean, let me challenge you here by asking you to walk us through the idea of neuroception.
Well, so can we go real quick? Can we go through the polyvagal ladder and the basic idea of polyvagal theory one more? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
please.
All right. So polyvagal theory is the idea that mammals in particular, we react to various levels of threats or danger from the external or the internal environment, and that it's an autonomic nervous system thing. So it's not something that we choose to react to. We talk about like trauma, how people respond to trauma. We use words like flight, fight, freeze, shut down, fawn, like all these words out there. But this was specifically, how does the biology react? It's not a choice. It's not like we're choosing these things. So like, how does our autonomic nervous system adjust to various levels of threat or safety? And there's a thing called a polyvagal ladder, which is at the very top of our biology. Our autonomic nervous system is the ventral vagal safe and social state. And these are the biological pathways that are responsible for connection. They're responsible for smiling. They're responsible for, they're very involved in like play. It's all the pro-social kind of things. Below that on the ladder is the sympathetic flight-fight system. And that's responsible for, running away and fighting if need be. And in that order specifically is flight and then fight. And then the bottom of the polyvagal ladder is the shutdown system, which is responsible for dissociation, collapsing, kind of like playing dead or playing possum. So that's the ladder. And where neuroception comes in is really the idea that it's not a conscious choice. I'm not super excited about using a computer as an analogy, but it serves the purpose of, computers are pre-programmed to respond to inputs, right? When I press the enter key, the computer program will drop down a line or whatever it does, right? So similarly, within mammals, that we have stuff like hardwired into it. So if I were to all of a sudden have more of a monotone voice and my eyes went wide and I just talked to you like this, like you probably would have a reaction to that. If I executed that correctly. I'm pretty nervous, so I don't know if it came across right. But but if you saw someone in real life who was very wide-eyed, no facial affect, awesome that my phone went off right now, no facial affect, that you would react to that. You would either have a heart rate go up, and you don't choose it. Your heart rate just goes up. Or even possibly that shutdown system would come alive, and you might feel something in your stomach, like, ooh, like this is just a creepy thing going on here, right? So that's neuroception. It's a choice. It's not a menu of options that you're choosing from. Really, it's a sequence of events of how we go down the ladder, but also come back up the polyvagal ladder. But it's not a conscious thing. There's no choice involved. It's hardwired. These responses are hardwired into us. And yeah, it looks different person to person probably. This has a lot to do with probably culture, upbringing, family environment, the environment you live in. So there's lots of things that come into play. But I think there are these universal like these responses that we have hardwired within us. Probably that helped us to survive through evolution and whatnot.
Yeah, those pieces of what's universal and what isn't, I think are really where the devil is, like where the value and understanding these things are. Because what your partner might be presenting to you as may not be how they're actually feeling. It's so easy for me to interpret, my girlfriend as being angry at me, when actually she's just very passionate about this, 15-year-old episode of Dawson's Creek and just didn't want to look away from it. And so I'm getting this danger cue that, oh no, she's really upset with me. She won't even make eye contact, when really she's in a great mood and is just totally focused on what she's doing.
There's whatever state she's in, but also there's the state that we're in as part of the the interaction. So the way that I perceive somebody who is maybe has like a flat affect or like wide eyes or is more tense. If I'm at the top of my polyvagal ladder, if I'm in my safe and social state and I'm really well anchored in there, then I can see that person and I'll be able to stay anchored in those biological pathways. I'll still be able to access my social engagement system. But that's if I have that system really well developed. But if I don't, or if I enter that situation in more of a flight fight energy, then the way that I experience that is going to be much less empathetic, first off, probably a lot less patient. There's probably going to be all these ideas that pop into my mind about what's wrong with this person or what's wrong with me. So like what we bring to the table is kind of like one half of it, maybe one half. The other person has what they're bringing to the table, but there's also the environment and how does that affect our biology, plus a whole bunch of other stuff that comes into the equation. But it's a two-way thing, and it's called co-regulation. We actually send these danger or safety cues back and forth, danger cues as well. That's called co-regulation, which is a separate topic I'm happy to go into as well. But that's co-regulation, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's important here to kind of highlight how this process works. You talked a little bit about the autonomic nervous system and sort of the level of choice, how it's not a menu in these different things. But I really want to point out how this is distinct from ESP or some other like supernatural pseudoscience and clear up that misconception. How are people like receiving and processing these danger and safety cues?
So it has a lot to do with brainstem. And so I'm a therapist. And as I was researching this, I got really deep into it, probably way too deep for my education level and what I'm capable of. And eventually I was getting to a point, my wife said, she's a nurse. And I was asking her questions about dendrites and stuff like that. And she's like, people go to school for years to like understand this stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay, so I might be taking on too much here. So I know it has a lot to do with brainstem. I know that there's certain pathways like the ventral vagal pathway that activates, or the safe and social state. There's a dorsal vagal. So I've gone that far. So it has a lot to do with brainstem, which is like it takes in information from the outside and so, like from the senses. So
yeah, I mean, on a more basic level, like you're
fundamental
hearing and listening and using those same sensors.
Yeah, so it's using the sensory inputs that we have, right? So hearing and seeing, seeing and feeling and all those things, and it's taking those and making these. I don't like the word decision, but it's sort of responding to what the neuroception of safety or danger is, and we don't use the word perception because perception kind of indicates that there's a subjective, individual, cultural kind of aspect to it. So perception has, I think it's more of a subjective individual thing. Neuroception, it speaks to the biology that we all share, that I believe is pretty much universal. And when no matter who the client is that I'm working with, when they describe what it's like for them to be in a shutdown state, to be stuck or to exist in a shutdown state, that there's universal things that I can kind of anticipate that their experience is going to be like. So they struggle to like name and describe what they're going through. But there's some things that feeling empty, feeling lonely, feeling numb, feeling disconnected, or even dissociated. There's things that universally just come along with being stuck in that more shutdown state. It looks like depression. So that's why I would say it's more of a universal thing. And it's again, not a choice. And it's not exactly perception. It's really the biology's response to a whole bunch of stuff, really. And the fact that the biology can get stuck in those states and we can exist in these states for years and years and years, potentially.
Yeah. Well, what are the quick takeaways? I mean, if we are becoming aware with our, more conscious mind of what's going on in our brainstem and sort of the environmental cues that we're picking up, what can we do with that information?
I think that co-regulation, like I mentioned, I think it's a big one, is understanding that whatever state that we're in, that we are projecting that. Like there are things that we're doing that suggest what state we're in. So if we're like tense and anxious or fidgety, we are projecting that we're in probably more of a flight fight kind of energy. Like we exist, or at least in that moment, in more of a flight fight kind of energy. So I think it's important to recognize that we give off these cues and the other person picks them up, and we're going to respond to each other's cues, to cues of safety or danger. And so ideally, we want to exist as much as possible in our safe and social state. And so we give off these safe and social cues. Not that easy. Not saying it's easy whatsoever. Downright extremely difficult for many of us, right? Especially with like quarantine and political stuff. And like a lot of us are probably dropped down our ladder globally, I would assume, right? So I think that's one thing, is co-regulation. The other thing that is really important that comes along with this is the concept of story follows state. And I kind of alluded to it before, that no matter what state we're in, that we're going to have some sort of narrative in our head that stems from that state. So our thoughts don't just exist by themselves. Our thoughts are directly related to what state that we're in. If we're in more of a flight fight energy, our thoughts are going to be more blaming. There's going to be a lot of blame involved, potentially, or a lot of projections of what somebody meant and what they're out to get me, and well, what did this text message mean? And like your thoughts switch along with whatever state that you're in. That's called story follows state from Deb Dana. I think those two are huge takeaways, and I think have a direct application to day-to-day life.
Yeah, for sure. And relationships, which is what I'm excited to be kind of getting into. And we're going to take a couple of calls before we get into that conversation. But while V is pulling that up, I guess I'm curious if you have any quick pro tips for how to create a neuroception of safety in our daily lives, or to create a more comfortable, more safe environment.
Yeah, it's what it really comes down to, and again, it's not that easy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole episode to itself. I know.
Right. But your body will tell you, if you listen and you're curious, not judgmental, but like curious, your body will tell you how it feels about whatever situation or whatever environment you're in. So I have my office here, my studio where I record the podcast, and my goal was to make this as many cues of safety as I possibly could. So things like the light above is more glaring, and if I turn that off and I have these smaller lights on around me, I just feel more at peace. I feel more likely to smile. I feel more likely just to take a deep breath and like relax. Versus going to like the DMV, your body will tell you that it's not a safe place. It doesn't exactly feel cozy. The crampedness, the lights, the loud noises of announcing numbers. So if you become curious and listen inward, your body will tell you that yes to this, no to that. And then if you can notice those small pieces, you can begin to develop your own personal environment and what feels the best for you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm super curious, because to me, what I'm hearing, and I love that we're going to be talking about specifics and how to actually utilize this. Justin, I love what you said about how information is one thing, but like, how do you actually benefit from it? How do you see it impacting you in the real world? For me, I'm curious because we get those cues subconsciously. The DMV is not a safe place. That doesn't necessarily mean that the DMV is unsafe. And I think that for me, I'm seeing a lot of people assuming that what they feel has a bearing on reality in a way that is unhealthy, right? Like, I felt like this was wrong, therefore it is wrong. Or I felt like this was the right thing to do, or that I was safe here, therefore it was true in reality. And I'm wondering if you can talk for a minute on kind of that differentiation, because I imagine that's very important to kind of pull apart in conversations with people.
I think so, and I'm glad you brought that up, because as I was saying it, I'm like, that sounds pretty self-centered. That's not the way I mean it, but like, it could easily go that direction. I think you're right, and I totally 100% with you there. So when it comes to this stuff, it's more about you. It's about the individual, and it's important to notice those thoughts that pop into your mind. But those aren't necessarily an accurate reflection of reality. Those might just be a thought that's in your mind, and it's okay to be curious about those without judgment. So, but it's really more about noticing, like, my biology. What makes me more likely to smile? What makes me personally more likely to be able to take a deep breath into my belly and to be able to let it out slowly? Like, and that's kind of good enough. Now, what makes me feel certain ways and therefore that thing is this way? No, that's not necessarily helpful. I think when you're in your safe and social state, those evaluative thoughts of, like, the value of somebody, of an individual or a group of people, those thoughts about this is their value, or this is my evaluation of their worth or their humanity or whatever it is. When you're in a safe and social state, those thoughts don't really happen. I think that thoughts are a lot more curious, a lot more interested, open, empathetic. But when you're in that sympathetic flight-fight energy, that's where judgments and evaluations come into play. You know what I mean? So it's important to recognize what thoughts are in you, but these are not necessarily reflections of reality. And you really have to be very curious about what's happening to be able to discern that. It's not easy, but the more ability you have to do things like smile and breathe easier, and I say those because when you're in your ventral vagal safe and social state, those capacities are unlocked. But that's a good indication. If I'm in that state, that's a pretty good indication that my thoughts are probably on the right track. And hopefully that doesn't sound too totalitarian.
Well,
No,
I
that
think
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think the frame here is not about assuming that these neuroceptive cues are accurate, but that recognizing that your brain is taking them in, and then going in and taking your wise mind and your conscious awareness and sort of evaluating what is otherwise like an unconscious kind of thought, and yeah, bringing that to bear. So yeah, by understanding these things, I think we can control our environment a little bit better to maybe close off some of that unnecessary noise.
Yes. that applies to your relationships as well. The people that you allow into your life or have earned a spot in your life is, there's people that you might call friends that you don't really feel safe around. Like, you don't really feel connected in. You don't really feel, safe. So I think the individual aspect of polyvagal theory is extremely important when it comes to who do you allow in your life and what does your environment look like. Yeah, all those things.
Wonderful.